The Ghost of Kyiv. Was this a real Ukrainian fighter ace that shot down 6 Russian invaders on the first day? We'll never know, but this is my homage to whoever those brave pilots were. So come inside and check out part 1 of my build of Trumpeter's Mig-29. First of all, I had to convert the aircraft to in-flight, and this required quite a big conversion. There's 11 gear doors that need to be modified because, of course, like most aircraft models, it's designed to be on the ground, but there's no way I was going to have the Ghost just sitting there on the ground. He needed to be up in the air and ready to go. So just my usual process of adding sheet styrene bits to make ledges around all the doors, and then modifying the doors. I had to add some extra plastic to the outside of the nose wheel doors. In the end I didn't need to, but it was a good exercise. The next step of the build are the intakes. The intakes went together quite well, but gluing them to the fuselage was a bit of a problem. The fit was, well, not Tamiya-like, but yeah, it's very Russian-like, I should say, which was a theme I used throughout the build, you know, excusing some poor fit by saying, well, you know, the tolerances weren't going to be that great. So the main gear doors were a big pain. We're talking 5 or so doors on each side, and again, just like the nose wheel doors, I had to add some ledges here and there just to get them to line up properly. The biggest one was that strange straight shape at the back there. I had to actually build up plastic because it's just a massive cavity to get that door to sit straight. And on one side it wasn't quite right, but it's good enough for what we need to do. The trick with modifying gear doors is just take your time and just realize it's still going to be less time and effort than it is to actually build landing gear and paint it and weather it and glue it in, and all the hassles you have with making what I call a car model. So the next fit issue were the engines. I had to make sure that those plates that connected the intakes to the engines were just right, otherwise it wouldn't fit at all. And to get these to glue in on the correct angle so those engine covers would actually fit. This took a whole night of dry fitting and making sure that just everything would line up. So again, you can't just take it by face value that everything's going to fit the first time. Dry fit, dry fit, dry fit. In the end, these engine covers, they really didn't fit too well. I had to go over the entire model with Mr. Surfacer as a filler to all those gaps there. You can see there's quite a big gap, and it just needed to be, well, good enough. Like I said, a Russian style gap. Moving on to the cockpit. This was the first time I used coloured photo etch throughout the cockpit. I used mainly the outer box parts, but as you can see on the side plates there and on the back wall, I used flat uncoloured photo etch. And just a hot tip for those of you who are a bit worried about using photo etch, you can actually glue flat parts to bare plastic. This is before you prime it or paint it with Tamiya extra thin, because if you let it melt the plastic a little bit, the metal will actually melt into the plastic. So for those big pieces, that's what I did. I'm just adding highlights here onto the light grey. This is a blend I had to put together using a few different types of MRP greys to sort of match the Eduard coloured photo etch. This kit that I bought, I actually intended to sell this kit, but then when the war started and I had to think of something to do, some sort of model to do, I pulled this out of my sale pile, and lo and behold, it had some coloured photo etch and other parts in there, and I just got stuck into it. So yeah, 3 weeks from start to finish it took me to build a 1/32 scale jet, which I think's not quite a record, but it's near enough. So the coloured photo etch, which I've never used before on the side panels, I've replaced instrument panels with a simple sheet. It's a strange colour that Eduard had used, and when I checked it against the Ukrainian references, it was kind of correct. It wasn't exactly right, so the blend I made up is also not quite 100% right, but it's good enough for, as we say, for government work. You're not going to see much of this because the canopy is going to be all closed up. Again, I'm just adding some highlights here on the top bits. You're not really going to see it, and then later on I I think I do add a wash to those parts just to increase the volume. Now the next major fit problem with this kit, as you can see there, is that canopy, the front canopy is not flush. So I had to tape it down, get out the sanding sticks, and very carefully take away a lot of plastic, because it's quite a it's a jarring effect when you see that. If you glue that down as is, it will not look right. So moving on back to the cockpit, I'm putting on the coloured bits on the instrument panel there. That's a 2-layered piece of photo etch, a black piece first, and then the lighter blue colour there to go on top. Time to put the panels on the cockpit sides. I know the trick with super glue is to use as least amount as possible, but I just found with this Edward stuff, even if you abraded the back of the panels, it still really wouldn't stick. And it's a bit of a pain because you have to paint around them, so putting them on bare plastic is actually not a solution. Now another thing with photo etch, you know, I left a fair bit of photo etch on the fret. I didn't use all of it because, well, you know, you don't have to use everything in a photo etch set, so don't get into the trap of saying, oh, I need to use every single tiny little minor part. Use what you think's appropriate, use what you think's increasing the detail. I mean, if I just painted the detail that was in the kit, it'd be nothing compared to just these basic photo etch parts I'm putting in now. However, having said that, I did get a few bits wrong. The instructions weren't quite correct, so I will try to fix them. Some of those levers are in the wrong spot. But yeah, overall, I think it's a good enough result to up the detail in that cockpit. My favourite coloured wash is a dark grey instead of a straight black, and so I just applied that in all the grooves and notches just to add a bit more volume to the overall look of the cockpit. You're not going to see much of this, again, as I keep saying, unless the canopy was completely open. But then again, you've got to add a bit more detail in terms of more wires and hoses and so forth. I don't know why I'm adding a wash there, because that's exactly where the ejection seat sits, so you're never going to see it. But there you go, I recorded it and you're watching it, and you'll never see it. Now gloss coat isn't necessary in here because I'm using MRP, so it's a nice clear sort of coat. Oh, speaking about clear, this is what you need to do after you've sandwiched those photo etch panels together, is get out any good clear gloss. I just use the Tamiya X22, and yeah, just slowly fill up those instrument panels. You need a gloss with a bit of viscosity. The Humbrol gloss coat works well as well. Now I must say, Trumpeter, they did a good job with designing how the tub goes together. The parts fit really nicely. I think I only used a tiny bit of glue in those notches. I didn't really need to really use glue. It just sort of snapped together. The only problem, of course, when you're using those big panels of photo etch is if the fit's not exactly right, they will snap off. And I think I had to fix 1 or 2 panels along the way here. But surprisingly, though, the fit was really, really good for the cockpit, and the tub itself, it fit inside the fuselage, no problem whatsoever. I think that'll do. Alright, here it is inside the fuselage. And just to make sure it fits, I've got that front cowl as well, which I'll weather up and paint. Now, here comes the fun part, putting the 2 fuselage halves together. At first glance and at the first dry fit, yeah, it seemed to, seemed to work. The only seam that really needed filling was that one from the, I guess they call them the leading edge extensions there. But yeah, after actually doing a proper fill there, I mean, the fit was okay. I had to go back and forth a few times with a little bit of Mr. Surfacer to get it right. But the main issue was particularly on the port side, there was a massive mold seam line. You can see there there's my favourite filling tool using the black super glue. Yeah, and it really stuck out. On the starboard side, it was not too bad. The other major issue I had was the starboard tail, the inside there, was completely short shot, and it was a good 3mm, 4mm gap all the way around, and it was one of those issues where I almost stopped doing the kit because I knew it was going to be a big fix, but I persevered and I pushed through it, and in the end I just added some sheet styrene, used some super glue, sand prime, until I got it just right. Now all these flight surfaces, they went on spectacularly well. They were, almost snap fit in, didn't need glue. I did deflect the ailerons there, as you can see, because I will have the Ghost banking in flight. I'm using Revell contactor glue on the leading edge slats there because you don't get a lot of glue area to put them in, even though the fit is very, very good. So Tamiya thin it by itself wouldn't really work, so I just used the slower and thicker glue just to get it set. And the next fit problem, these flare racks on the bloody top of the wing, the fit was just atrocious. I cut off the tabs and just reprofiled the bottom, and I had to go over again with Mr. Surfacer just to fill in the small gaps because they're quite noticeable on the top wing. The final bits of assembly here on the fuselage halves was just adding the, you could call them greeblies, all the bumps and scoops, and the most of the antennas I left off because I know they're going to get knocked off, so I'll put them on last just before I do the final paint. For the photo etch, I added a little bit more extra there was an Edward external set with the kit. I added just the simple parts, the flat sort of, grills and so forth. There's a pair underneath the nose, and there were a few other vents and so forth around the kit. But the main ones I used from the Edward set were for the louvers on the top side there. Now they were a lot thinner than the kit photo etch that they give you, but they still needed a careful contouring just to fit into that slot. You can see I'm using Tamiya extra thin there, because again I'm using that trick where you melt the plastic to help it sort of soak into the photo etch, and I had to use a bit of pressure to just form that to make sure it was sitting nice and flush. If you use a kit photo etch, you actually have to remove a lot of plastic there to get that to fit. Now here comes the fun part of the build, another one that a solution that probably isn't required for everyone, but I magnetized the missiles. So this was a very simple process, lining them up, the missiles to the pylons. You just drill a couple of pilot holes where those notches were. After I did that, I got my trusty Proxon out with a 1.9mm drill bit and expanded those holes. You've got to take care because the magnets I'm using, they're rare earth magnets, they're 2mm by 2mm. Got to make sure that that hole doesn't take away too much plastic because it needs a bit of purchase to actually fit in there. So I'm being careful there to place the magnet in. So all I do there is I just snap in the magnet, and it's a nice tight fit because I'm using a slightly less than 2mm drill bit. And then the next part of this trick to make sure you got the right polarity is don't just put one magnet in, put in two. So what I did after making sure they were nice and flush, I put the stack of magnets back on there, as you can see, and I just left another one there. If you can get off you get, there you go. And then put another one on there just to make sure that the polarity is going to be right, because those magnets will go in the pylons. So I get out my alcohol pen that I use there and I mark the underside of those magnets. So I shouldn't see those black bits, so I know if I've got them wrong, if they come off or I move them off the pylons, they're the right polarity. So I take the notches off the pylons, and again, same process, pilot hole first, and just making sure that they line up just right. So I need to make sure I've got that pilot hole in the right position. Because if you got it all lined up just right, the fit is super quick. It didn't take long at all to do all 4 missiles on this one, and I'm definitely going to use this process again in all my future builds. So out with the Proxon with that 1.9mm bit, make sure it's all lined up properly. Makes a god-awful mess on the bench, of course, but that's what we've got benches for. Now here's the fun bit. Use a little bit of super glue and just line the inside of that hole, because you want these magnets to stay there when you pull them apart. You don't want them to come apart from magnetic forces. So just add a little bit of fast super glue on the inside, and then I line up the missile with a pylon with the two magnets. Remember, they're stacked up there. So once I've got it lined up, I want to press it in as hard as I can, and that'll transfer that other magnet into the hole, and the super glue will take it. You give a little twist, boom, they're transferred. Sometimes you have to just push them in just to make sure they're nice and flush, and it's done. Sometimes I add a little bit more super glue here just to the top. It doesn't matter if the magnets don't perfectly touch, as long as the magnets are inside the plastic. Now we get to the painting of the ejection seat, and I'm just using life color paints here and my trusty Winsor & Newton brushes. And I went off some of the references and added a bit more highlights and details here. I think I painted the ejection seat in NATO black. Now you might be able to see that there's another magnet just sitting there on that seat. I mean, there's a big stack of coin magnets on the bottom there that I'm using as a holder. But what I did was I figured, hey, let's put a magnet in the seat and a magnet up the bum of the pilot. Because if they line up together, I can remove the pilot from the seat to paint and fit and what have you. So that's what I did. So after doing some basic painting, a bit of dry brushing, some chipping and worn metal effects, it was time to paint the pilot, the Ghost. So I used a basic approach here, nothing new under the sun. I primed after filling all the seams and removing the mold seam lines and so forth. This was I can't remember where I got this pilot from. I've got a big stash of pilots that people have sent me over the years. All my modelling friends who don't do aircraft in flight, so I've literally got a massive box full of pilots. So I've found one that was close enough to what the Ukrainians used, and yeah, the process I'm using here is just painting his after priming it in, I think, sky grey. Any light grey will do, just as long as it adheres well as a nice primer. All I did was I just very lightly covered using life color olive drab, and then I made up a palette of the usual, two highlights and a shadow. So here I'm just using a highlight version of that olive drab, which is basically just a little bit more white. And I'm just doing a basic process here, very thin paint, and just hitting the highlights of all those folds. And then the inverse with the shadows, just put the shadow bits inside the creases. I didn't use any washes or any filters or glazes. I mean, I might have added, I think later on with the gloves, I mixed a bit of burnt umber and a bit of dark brown just to get a bit of variation. So here we see I'm almost at the end here. It's really hard to paint figures under camera. I'll try to do a better job next time of doing the whole thing, but yeah, I have to use a loop all the time. My eyesight's gone. But after adding a bit of detail, I've added a Ukrainian blue bandana or shirt just to add a bit more colour, and then I thought, no, I need to do a bit more. And I came up with a crazy idea from a bit of propaganda I saw online. So stay tuned, here we go. Yes, he's wearing a jacket. That's a jacket of Panzer Putty. So what I'm doing here is I masked out his visor with some masking tape and some eyes there, and I'm painting a white skull on his helmet. After I did that, I covered the skull with a bit more Panzer Putty, the clever putty, and I painted his entire helmet in Ukrainian yellow. So this is really going to stand out. Back to the ejection seat, I've added a bit of coloured photo etch, and I've added the basic seatbelt setup there, and there's the Ghost. You just plop him in with his magnet, And there's the face mask. So as you can see, I'm going a bit crazier with this build, and yeah, don't come at me with the rivet counters. It's not going to be that sort of build. Alright, moving on, we need to finish this up. So I've got the final cockpit pieces to put in, the cowl at the front and that line there. Again, I must say, Trumpeter, they did a good job with the fit in here, because all this just snap fits in. I didn't have to use any glue. And I'm just checking the fit of the canopy there, just to make sure it goes in okay. I know that I have to not use the mirrors, because yeah, it won't fit with the mirrors closed in there. So there's the Ghost, and I'm pushing him in. Again, I could have used magnets at the bottom of the ejection seat, and that's a method I might try in future builds. But luckily, Trumpeter here, the location pins at the bottom of that cockpit tub are really easy to find. Now the rear canopy has two parts, a plastic and then a lining. And I'm just checking here if the fit's okay, and there's a troublesome fit there. I might need to modify them, so I haven't glued the pieces together just yet, but I reckon it should be no trouble at all. It is time for final assembly, so here we go. Turning it over, you'll see first I've got that's a big external fuel tank, and that's what I used to locate the gym hole. That's going to take the in-flight rod, so I thought that was just a really good addition there to give it a bit more security. And here we go, the pylons are glued into the wings with their magnets, and then it's just a simple case of finding the right missile to the right pylon. If it doesn't work, it's because the polarity is all wrong, which I think I got wrong here with these big R-27 missiles. I think I put it on the wrong pylon. Upside down, Miss Jane? No? What am I doing? Come on, put it on. Ah, it's too far forward. There we go. So it's real handy having those magnets. The kit nozzles are okay. They're a little bit thick, but the fit is really, really good. These just snap fit on, which is great for painting separately. Now those stabilators didn't actually dry fit in properly. I had to drill out the holes off camera. You'll see them in a minute. And then the rudders, they fit in no problem whatsoever. Again, no glue, just snap fit in. So it's a bit of a strange kit, the old Trumpeter one. It's some of the fit's great, some of the fit not great at all. It's definitely not shake and bake. And yeah, you really need to bring your A and B game here to fix some of the problems that come up. We're missing one more thing. What is it? A base. This is a nice piece of, I think it's Tasmanian oak, and just a 9mm acrylic rod. I will put a bit more of a bend in that, because I did notice that it was a little bit too level, even though I made the gym hole on an angle. So I want a bit more banking of the Ghost. With a nice firm shove, it just fits in there really nicely. Well, there it is. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of my build of the Ghost of Kyiv. And yeah, part 2, I hope to finish this all up with a really, really interesting paint scheme. Obviously, I'll be using as a basis the Ukrainian digital camouflage, but I'm going to do my own little take on it, because as I said at the start of this video, while the Ghost may not have been real, we can imagine what we want in our own little modelling world. So I'm going to come up with something, yeah, a little bit different, and that's what I wanted as an homage, or whatever you want to call it, a sort of an attempt on my part to give some support to the Ukrainians. And yeah, so I hope you enjoy that video, and stay tuned for the final part. Cheers.